Welcome to another episode of Social Workers Matter. My name is Sylvia Smith, Dr. Sylvia Smith, your host here as usual. Trying to get to grips with all the work I have to do during this very busy period. So speaking with friends on the podcast is an absolute pleasure, and we have another lovely guest with us today. Maria, how are you?
Hello, Dr. Sylvia. I am fine.
I like that, Dr. Sylvia. Wow.
Oh, you've worked hard for it.
Yeah, tell me about it. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out to chat with us here at Social Workers Matter. I mean, the reason I approached you was we've only recently met. We met at an event that you were part of, possibly part of organizing, but certainly one of the guest speakers at the event.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued by what you'd said about the work that you do. So we'll get into that in a moment. But Maria, just start by telling us a little bit about who you are, and how it is you've come to be here. You can make it as short or as long as you want.
I'm a storyteller.
Oh
So
wow! Okay, yes,
I'm not
so that
sure.
helps. That helps, doesn't it?
So I'm not sure how short that is going to be. So yeah. So my
Well,
name's
you're the one who's busy, so I'm going to leave it entirely up to you.
Yeah. So I'm Maria. I'm a mother of two children.
Wow. Okay.
A boy who's turning 19 and a girl who's turning 15.
Okay.
And I always love to describe myself as a mom because I have learned a lot from that
Sure.
role.
Sure.
So
Okay.
that's my first identity as a mom. I'm a sister. So I'm the last born in a family of 6.
Okay.
Um,
You're the baby.
I'm the baby. I'm
Mm.
the baby. And that's important for me because growing up in Zimbabwe and as a female, um, there were stories and narratives that I experienced by virtue of being female and being the last born, which contributed and influenced my direction of work.
Mhm.
And I'm a family therapist, so I'm a qualified systemic psychotherapist. And I love to say that the full title of family systemic psychotherapist because there is a lot of work that I have done in relation to that for me to be qualified, So yeah, so that's who I am. And
Okay. Okay. Excuse me. I suppose one of the first questions that's I'm triggered to ask straight away: why systemic family therapy? What was it?
um,
How was it meaningful for you, that approach?
I I first came across a family therapist when I was working in substance misuse. So I was running a clinic for pregnant women who were misusing substances.
What, back home or
And
here in this
no,
country?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
in the UK. So I
Hmm.
was running a clinic, and so I was receiving supervision from a family therapist. And what intrigued me at that point was how she asked questions when
Okay.
she was working with couples.
Okay.
So we've got questions that we call secular questions. And what secular questions do, they invite you to mentalize the other person and think
Hmm.
about what could be going on for the other person. And earlier on when I was introducing myself and I said, I'm the last born in a family of,
Yes.
yeah,
6. Yeah. 6
in a
children. Yeah.
family of 6. So things were always done to me.
Mm-hmm.
Decisions were always made for me. So I never
Sure.
had a voice. And so when I came into the space of a family therapist and saw how a secular question invited the quieter voices
Mm-hmm.
to come out, I was like, that's for me. because what
Wow.
it then got me to do was to think about all the times that I had been silenced. When I was growing up, things had been done for me, decisions made for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I can actually talk. I have a voice, and
Mm-hmm.
I can help other people to have a voice and be heard. So that's what then got me intrigued into family therapy.
Wow.
And then it took me, I think, about 4 years for me to actually start training as a family therapist.
Okay. Um, Give us an example. I mean, some of our listeners, some of our audience won't necessarily be familiar with this approach. Some will actually not even be within the profession. So, if you were going to explain to a lay person what is a circular question, give us an example of what that looks like.
Yeah. So it's something as simple as, Maria, if your son was here, what would he say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Something that simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
If someone who you respect was here, what would they say? And for Christians, I am a Christian. So what I like to ask is, what would Jesus say?
Mm-hmm. So that gives people the opportunity to mentalize, as you've just shared. Wow. Okay. Nice. Okay, so you given us a bit of background in terms of your family. You've given us a little bit of an idea of some of the work that you do, but also importantly, what you are now doing in terms of family therapy. Um, Tell us a little bit then about your career. Where have you been? What have you been up to?
Oh my days. So I came and I studied nursing. So I'm a
Okay,
psychiatric nurse. And through my psychiatric nursing, that's when I came into contact with a family therapist, and then I
right.
trained family therapist. So the training for family therapy, it's a 4-year master's course. And at that point, I got a job in children's services.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working in local authority as a qualified family therapist. And within that space, I was working in child protection,
Mm-hmm.
child in need, um, gangs.
The easy bit, yeah.
So I did, yeah, I worked in gangs unit and serious youth violence, and
Wow.
then youth offending. So I have a passion of working in serious youth violence and youth offending. So at the moment, I consult 1 day a week in youth offending, and I'm a freelance trainer.
Mm-hmm.
So I train systemic ideas, and I recently, in the last couple of years, started training on anti-racism,
Mm-hmm.
and I've also been training on trauma in the last couple of years.
Right. So now we've got to the bit that caught my ear when I heard you speak, and but I mean, not of course to discount the significance of what you've done prior to what you're doing now in the area of trauma, but
Yeah.
because I guess they're all linked. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So tell us then a bit about your well, I'm now nosy. Tell us a bit about your anti-racism work, because I do some similar stuff with possibly someone who we both know. And then also tell us how that then led to, or how that leads you to working in the area of trauma.
Yeah.
I've got another question, but I'm going to wait till you've responded.
So with the anti-racism work, I got introduced to anti-racism during my training, because at that point, I didn't know what anti-racism was.
Sure.
Even though I came from a colonized country, we had never been I'd never been given words and language for me to articulate or even name what racism was. So I didn't know it until I got into my training as a family therapist, where I was seeing things and I was thinking, what on earth is going on here? I don't understand it, because that the difference with racism here in the UK, it's like a gas. You smell it, it's lethal. Yeah. In comparison to South Africa, where it was apartheid and it was clear. They don't like you. Yeah. But here you doubt yourself and you think, what just happened there? So that was in my training as a family therapist. And then when I qualified, there was a white social worker in the team that I was working in who I thought he was bullying me. And my manager at that point turned around and said to me, Maria, this has got nothing to do with your age. The man is a racist. He named it for me. So in him naming it for me, he moved it away from bullying to what it actually was. And at that point, I started seeing the world differently. I'd already been introduced to it, and now it was in a different form. And at that point, actually, a couple of steps back, when I'd started working in this team, my manager had said to me, Maria, use your race to see the children who are put on child protection plans. Is it fair? Is it not fair? And what is making it unfair? So ensure that you're using a race lens, to actually assess what is going on. So those incidents happened just as I had qualified. And so that is when I started being actively involved in anti-racism. Because what I was now thinking about was looking at the families that were coming through into the work that I was doing from a racial perspective. So you would find parents would come in. I remember working with I'll give you two examples. A parent had just given birth, and you know what it's like in African communities, and in other communities as well. After you give birth, family comes around, they help you, they support. And at that point, that family was allocated an African social worker.
Right.
And so the African social worker came to me, just like, Maria, I want a consultation. I'm really worried about this mom. She's not looking after her child. She's getting everyone else to do the work for her. So I said to the social worker, when you had your children, did your family support you with regards to looking after your children? And she goes, yes. And I said, so why are you seeing it as a deficit in a family from a minoritized community? So she stopped. Because what she was already bringing up was the deficit that is always used when looking at minoritized communities.
Significant part of our training. Yeah.
The second example was a parent who had a child who had physical illness. And what this parent was describing was she looked at her child in order for her to know whether her child needed insulin or didn't need insulin. And what the other professionals were saying was that she wasn't taking the blood sugar levels for her to ascertain that. So they were already discrediting her way of knowing. And this mom was saying, but the times that I give my child insulin, I'm giving my child insulin at a time that is right. They never had any problems with it, but it was just because of the way that this parent was making sense of when she should give a child insulin or shouldn't, that professionals were actually discrediting her ability as a parent.
I suppose the big issue there is sort of ideas of rationality and science and so on, which is often used in some of these arenas to prove points and stuff like that. So,
but then for me it was more than that. Because you look at Chinese and you are able to accept herbal medicine from Chinese, but not from us. And so it was that bit around, who then do you accept that this is okay for us to do this and this is not okay? And what all of that was getting me to think about is how things are generalized for us, but not generalized in the sense of we know what we're doing, but from a deficit perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's so hierarchical,
Yeah.
and then I guess plays into perceptions about African people anyway. So I absolutely see where you're coming from.
What do we know?
Yeah.
We don't know anything, you know, and you look at it, the ways of knowing, they come from you holding a certificate. They don't come from you actually saying, I'm using my body and I know what it is that I'm talking about. I'm using my relationships as a way of knowing. And when you are within those spaces,
and my lived experience.
And my lived experiences.
Yeah.
So white patriarchy does that. Our ways of knowing are actually discredited every time. And this is where the work then grew from.
Wow. Okay, so you're taking us on a journey. So what then steeps you in working with trauma? And what does that look like?
So working with trauma. So what I was now finding was with a lot of minoritized families that I was now meeting, I had to justify and prove myself first.
Okay.
When I went in to work with these families.
To the families?
To the families.
Okay.
And the justification was from, I understood where they were coming from. I understood why they didn't trust the system. I understood why they wouldn't call the police if they were in fear. I understood why they wouldn't go to A&E. So I was starting to think about intersectionality at that point. Race, mental health, and what the institutions had actually created. So in me justifying that I wasn't a part of the system, I realized that there was so much trauma that these families were actually carrying, the generational trauma that I needed to understand, and I needed to kind of like work with before we even started thinking about the reasons why they were known to children's So at that point, trauma was usually the big T trauma, you know. There's big incident, you've got post-traumatic stress, you're having flashbacks, you're having this. But for them, it was underlying in their ways of being. So we needed to unpick that and understand where that was coming from. So working in child protection and also working in the gangs unit, I started seeing a lot of behaviors that got me to actually be interested in trauma. So
give us some examples, Maria, because you know, in many respects, what you're sharing with us is quite complex, and you know, it wouldn't necessarily be apparent immediately. So some tangible examples of what you're sort of seeking to get across to us would be really helpful.
So I worked with
case examples are always the best, aren't they? So thanks for that.
So I worked with a family where they were known, their children were on a child protection plan. And had a good relationship, so built up a good relationship with the parents. And at some point I said something that triggered a response that I didn't see coming. And so I had to reflect and think about where that response was coming from. They didn't trust me
Mm-hmm.
at that
Mm-hmm.
point. The
Mm-hmm.
relationship that I had built was then broken. They didn't trust me. They then accused me of being a part of the system, and all that I'd been doing before was a way of me trying to get them into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a very high level case example, because I don't have their consent for me to go into details.
Sure. 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 Sure.
But the reason why that stood out for me is because I was also taken aback by the response.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then what we know with regards to trauma is trauma comes back as a reaction
Mm-hmm.
to something. It's not a memory. And so what I had triggered at that point was a reaction to something that I had said. And so it had taken this parent back to the experiences that they had had that had been traumatizing to me.
Okay. Okay.
And so because of my training, I had to stop and think about what had just happened at that point. Because as a therapist, as a family therapist, the way that we make sense of situations is you don't put the problem in a person. You look at the interaction, you look at the context, you look at the communication.
Right.
So that's what I then had to step back and think about, post that session, what happened. So I looked at the family's history. There had been a lot of domestic violence. There had been the usual change of social workers. There had been a lot of mistrust. So all of that was then playing out in the here and the now, in the conversation that I had had with mom.
Wow. 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 Okay. I mean, you mentioned social workers a moment ago. I mean, this is Social Workers Matter. The work that you're talking about sounds really intense. You said you've also worked in a local authority setting as well. How does that work? Because I recall vividly, I used to work in a South London borough, and we at one stage had some family therapists that were in their own team, and they would come alongside social work teams to try to help them make sense of what might be going on in families. Because, to be honest, lots of the social workers, because of the rapid nature of their work, didn't have that thinking space. So the family therapists worked alongside and helped to make sense. How are you working alongside others, other professionals, and how does that work out? You could be honest.
So the model in the local authority that I was in, we had a clinician, so a family therapist who was embedded in the team. So my way of working was, I always say to social workers, I love going on a joint visit. So every time they came for a consultation, I would say, shall we go and do this together? So they would see, how I asked questions, what I looked out for, what I did. So that is how I did my work. So I always went on joint visits with social workers whenever possible. And so what I created, the culture that I helped to create in that team was we can work with difference. We can start thinking differently, and it is okay. How do we appreciate that when we're working with people who don't look like us, who don't talk like us? We've got so many protected characteristics that are different to us. So
how was that received, Maria? Was that valued? Because it sounds valuable. How was that received?
So
for the most part.
So others didn't trust me within the team. So and others welcomed it. So, in everything where change needs to happen, change happens in a relationship.
Yes.
So I made sure that I created relationships with the team that I was working with, to the extent whereby every time they had a new referral, they would come to me. Maria, I need a space for me to think about this.
Oh, good.
Is it possible for us to actually go together on this? So I ended up being super, super busy because I spent the time creating the space for them to feel safe, to come and say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I want to do, what are your thoughts, and then would co-create what we needed to do.
Yeah, I could see how you'd get very busy, but I would also hope that there's some learning there for colleagues, and that's a legacy, hopefully, isn't it? Before you get totally burnt out. But in terms of them having this sort of external Maria, questioning and keeping that in mind in terms of their own work. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are you doing now?
A lot.
Well, this is where you get to unburden yourself, Maria.
I really struggle with that question because it just feels as if my hands are in so many pies at the moment. So I'm doing private work where I'm
with individuals or families or both.
Everything, I think. So I've got individuals, I've got families, I've got couples, and I've also got some consultancy work and training that I do. So in all of that, because one of the things as a therapist, as a family therapist, we are trained to work with systems. So that's why we're called systemic psychotherapy.
Yes.
We can work with any systems. So I'm doing a lot of work in teams as well around anti-racism and trauma. So in the last year or two, I've started training film producers and directors around using a trauma-informed lens in the film industry. So I've been delivering that. And I've also been training and delivering workshops on anti-racism. And this is where you and I met, because you can't talk about racism without talking about trauma. So all the work that I've done within local authority and my own experiences of racism, and the impact of that have all helped me to actually develop my training on anti-racism and on trauma. So that's where I'm currently at the moment.
So do you see possibly in the future writing? Because I mean, that whole thing around anti-racism and trauma, obviously needs to be further developed. I mean, what are your thoughts about not just doing the work, but sort of reflecting on the work and sharing that with others beyond, beyond what you're doing at the moment? I mean,
I have to take a deep breath.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Because of all the traumas that I have experienced. It's only in the last year or so that I realized that I hadn't been writing because of the traumas that I had experienced during my training. So yeah, I'm actually feeling it.
Oh dear.
And the reason why I'm naming that I'm feeling it is one of the things that I've realized as well in the work that I do around trauma is we don't use our bodies enough in terms of understanding what information we've just received and the impact of that. And so a lot of times when I'm delivering on anti-racism and on trauma, I always invite my audience to actually just stop, and pay attention to their bodies. What is my body saying, and how do I make sense of it? Because we have so much information from our bodies that we don't use. So going back to the question, so when I finished my training, I vowed that I would never do a course where I needed to write an exam or I needed to
Right.
write anything, because my experiences during my training had just been horrendous, and I didn't realize the impact of it. But I kept on being told by my supervisor, Maria, you need to write this. You're doing beautiful pieces of work, especially because the therapy that I was providing was not the conventional type of therapy. Working in youth offending, working in gangs, you see these young people where they want to be seen. At times you're seated on a park bench and you do the work. At times you're walking, you're doing the work. It was so unconventional. And I just kept on saying, yes, I will, yes, I will, yes, I will, yes, I will. But I never did until I did my coach training. And in my coach training, you have to record yourself so that you can get feedback from your mentor.
Right.
And I froze in the first video that I recorded.
Wow.
Being a therapist, I stopped and I had to reflect on what was going on. And at that point, I realized, because I was going to be handing over my recording for feedback, that's what froze me. And this goes back to what I said before, that trauma comes back as a reaction. I reacted to what had been triggered in my body at that point. And I had to stop and think, what on earth is going on here? And tracing, I've been qualified now for nearly 10 years. So it's taken me this long. And then addressing my experiences in supervision and the impact of that on how I turn up. So now I'm at a point where I'm ready to actually write, because I needed to. I needed to go through that in order for me to release whatever my body was.
Really significant.
Yeah.
Do you're reminded, I'm reading a book at the moment, and I keep banging on about it with other people. The author is called Julani. Can't remember. Anyway, it's called
Living While
Black. Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm actually listening to the audio version.
Yeah.
And she, where I'm up to is this bit where she talks about our bodies and the impact.
Yep.
And where we hold
yeah
trauma and how that shows up.
Yep.
Quite often in sickness and so on. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And so for me, because remember, I'm a psychiatric nurse.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested in how we make sense of mental illness as a global majority. And the reason being, it will manifest in physical illness for us. We don't name depression because we don't know depression. We don't name anxiety because we don't know it. But we've got biological symptoms, we've got physical symptoms that will show that we are depressed, we are anxious, and we've got these somatic symptoms of mental illness. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is because it's so important for us to actually differentiate, and name culturally, be culturally aware and culturally sensitive around how we talk about all these illnesses and how we even talk about trauma, because that intersectional lens will help us to then identify and see when someone is responding as a traumatic response to what is actually playing out in the conversation.
Wow.
So that book is really, really good because she's also got a framework in there around reflection.
Yeah, and the self-care bits. What I'll do is I'll put a reference to it in the show notes for this podcast. But I'm really struck by how well, what I'm loving is the fact that she's writing, speaking to us as Black people,
Yeah.
or people of color. It doesn't mean that no one else can read it, but I think it just gives a real sense of our lived experiences on a day-to-day basis, which
Definitely.
is so important. It's so important. And even in terms of doing the work, the anti-racist work, that has consequences and takes its toll. How have you managed that for yourself?
Oh, another deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
I was a guest speaker yesterday at an event, at a conference, and someone in the audience had just shared some traumatizing experiences.
Yeah.
And I kept quiet. And so someone's like, "Oh, that got you quiet, didn't it?" And I said, "No, it didn't. I'm listening to my body.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to the information that has just been shared." Because what happens is we suffer from secondary trauma, vicarious trauma.
Yes.
Every time by ingesting all these different and difficult narratives from the media, or even from a conversation.
Yep.
There's a book that has been written, Common Shock. We observe some of these things on a daily basis,
You just pause there for a second. I need a pen. Oh, no. You'd have thought I'd been a bit more better prepared for this. Common shock.
Common shock.
Okay, sorry, Maria, carry on.
No worries. So common shock just reminds us of how within our reach every time there is traumatizing information, but we just carry on as if it is normal. We don't stop to think about what is going on. And the reason why I'm sharing it, just going back to your question, is you have to know your body, within this space. So when my heart is beating super fast, I name it, because I have to acknowledge what it's doing. Because what happens is when we become triggered,
yes,
our brain gets into safety mode, because our brains are not geared to be right. They're geared to be safe. So when they are geared to be safe, that then means it's going to impact and influence how I think and how I make sense of a situation. So when my heart is beating super fast, I have to acknowledge that, so that I can then tell my brain that, you know what, I have seen that, I acknowledge that, and then I can bring in a different part of my brain into the work that I'm doing. So that's what I do when I am in the middle of presenting and the information is quite difficult. And I share Juliana's work as well around, how do I name, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and where my body is responding in relation to that. So I do that. But I've also got a network of people who I also call upon when I need to vent. And at times it's just that I need to vent. Someone has pissed me off. How dare they ask something like that? So I've got a very close friend who I trained with, who I call, and at times just send a message and say, "I'm pissed off. How can someone do da 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 da?" And at times I need space for me to actually think about it. So I take it either to supervision or I take it to coaching, actually sit down and unpick where all of those different feelings are coming from and how I can learn from them, One of the things that I'm also learning is to say no, because there's power in saying no.
Absolutely.
And speaking up, that this is not right, and this
Yeah.
is what you're making me
Get it out of you.
get it out of me.
I think there's so many things that you've just shared that really strongly resonate. And as you were speaking, and particularly when you were talking about, I mean, this is real self-care in many respects. Yes, I'll go and get my pedicure or my manicure or whatever. That's fine, but this is real self-care in relation to the work that we do, because I think the dangers around desensitization and dissociation, where you kind of, and when you were talking about even some of the material you present or you hear, I remember recently doing something similar with a colleague of mine, and it was, one of the topics was about the limits or the limitations that Black staff experience in terms of sort of promotion and so on. And I was sort of reeling off a load of statistics, and she sort of said to me, "How do you feel about that?" Because I hadn't been feeling about it. I hadn't been feeling about it. I'd just been reeling it off. And then, obviously I've done it several times since. And now, of course, I do feel about it. And I think to myself, I'm not going to be able to keep on doing this without feeling something about it. So that is what you're sharing really triggered in me. And it's so important that we feel something about it and take care of ourselves.
And as a therapist, I always use embodied work in what I do. So even when I'm delivering one-to-one trauma work, I use the body a lot, because as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. How do we actually get the narrative from the body around what that sensation means for the person? Because in order for someone to heal from trauma, you need a coherent narrative. So how do we start using embodied practices in order for us to help navigate that narrative and help it to be coherent? Because what trauma does is it gets you to doubt yourself. It gets you to mess up your relationship. So you can't have relationships. It affects your ways of relating. So how do we start thinking about that in a relational way, using embodiment in order for that work to then come up? So you end up actually creating a space where you are a secure base for someone to be able to then, do the work that they need to do.
Okay, Maria, I know I'm conscious of time and I'm conscious of your time, but I mean, what's your, I mean, sounds a bit trite, but where are you going?
I haven't got a clue where I'm going.
Okay, that's fine.
But what I'm very conscious of at the moment is, as women, we have so many narratives that we carry that are quite traumatizing for us. So I'm really interested in that. I am a coach, and I call myself an Ubuntu coach. I am because we are. And the reason why I like that is because I am having to regain and I don't even know what the right word is, to get my culture back. So how do I help other people to develop themselves in a way that is authentic for them? So I'm interested in giving voice, not to the voiceless, because we all have voices, but our volumes have been turned down. So how do I help people to actually do that? And this is where me being the last born in my family positions me, because my voice was turned down, my volume was and down.
Yeah.
So I'm more aligned. I get attracted to people who are quiet because I always feel they've got something to say. So how do I create a platform for them? So that's where my
interests are. Yeah. Wow. Fantastic.
And just the intersectionality of everything, you know, especially religion, race, gender. And I point out religion. I'm a Christian, but I'm also very mindful that religion is implicit in oppression, and people feel oppressed, but they're not able to then navigate that. So that's something that I'm interested in as well. So
Wow.
yeah.
Well, you haven't started your journey with the writing yet, I guess, is what you're also telling me. So we can't point anyone in that direction yet. But I mean, I think things like possibly a blog, if you can find the space, would be great. I'd love to follow you if that were available. If you had your own podcast where you were sharing perhaps 5 or 10 minutes a time of some of your thoughts, and some of the sort of insights you may have gained in any given week or whatever.
Yeah.
That would be lovely to sort of be able to follow. So I'm just throwing it out there. Just sorry?
I've got a recording that I did. It's a very short clip that I did for Olmec. That was in 2020 or something. And I was asked to do a recording on 100 Black women speak. So I spoke about my experience as a Black woman, with a pun on the word bold. Because my bold personality is scary. And so it was a pun on bold as in a bold head or bold personality. So
do you have the link?
Yes, Olmec 100 Great Women Speak.
Yeah, you'll need to send it to me, and then I'll pop it on the podcast, and I'll look at it myself too.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, it's been absolutely fascinating, and I hope we can get together again soon.
Yes.
Even if it's just to sort of share, you know, some of your insights in terms of the work that you're doing or in relation to yourself and so on. I hope we have another opportunity to do that. So, you know, again, thank you so much for spending time with us here at Social Workers Matter. I know our audience will get tremendous value. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with as you leave us?
Ooh. We all live our lives as stories.
Okay. Yeah. Yours has been absolutely fascinating. I know we've only scratched the surface. Anyway, thank you so much, and take good care.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Take care.
It's a wrap.
How was that? Oh my days. Like, am I
wonderful.
answering? Am I not?
Well, the reason why I like these kinds of conversations is you never quite know. I know it may feel a bit scary, but you never quite know where you're going to end up. And then, you know, the fact that sometimes you find yourself sharing stuff that you probably had somewhere there, and then suddenly it's coming out now. So, you know, it's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This will probably it'll probably come out next Wednesday.
Okay. You know, when you were like, if Maria, you're sharing some deep stuff here, I was like, shit, have I intellectualized things?
No, but I mean, you see, in our world, there's a language that we speak.
Yes.
And then, you know, sometimes we need to break it down because we'll get wrapped up in it because it's like intriguing and whatever, and then we've alienated the rest of the audience. But no, that was fine. I know that, you know, those are my mates from Tavistock. They'll definitely get into it. But you know, I think it's so important to sort of share it from our perspective and show the depth.
Yep.
It's like no easy thing. So
there
you go.
Not at all. But yeah. Thank you so
All right,
much.
my darling. Take care and have yourself a good evening.
Same to you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.